Good morning. Welcome to quarantine day number 1, or like Sunday number 1 anyway. So we're going to not let it keep us from worshiping the Lord together this morning. So glad that you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you're at. But thank you so much for doing that. And we're going to go ahead and worship the Lord with a couple of songs. And Pastor's going to bring us a sermon this morning. So if you would. If you want to sing with us, go ahead right there in your living room. That's going to be awesome. We're going to sing, Are You Washed in the Blood? Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you walking daily by the Savior's side? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Do you rest each moment in the crucified? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Lay aside the garments that are stained with sin, and be washed in the blood of the Lamb. There's a fountain flowing for the soul unclean. Oh, be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? So I got to tell a little story real quick about Dawson. Sorry, can I do that? Is that legal?
Sure.
So yesterday we're sitting on the couch and he's taking piano lessons, and so he learned how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. And yesterday we're sitting on the couch and he says, you know what? I think that Mary Had a Little Lamb was talking about Jesus, because Jesus is the lamb and his mom's name was Mary. So I thought that was cute, but anyway, being washed in the blood of the Lamb made me think of that again. So now we're going to sing Stronger. You are stronger, sin is broken, you have saved me, it is written, Christ is risen, Jesus, you are Lord of all. There is love that came for us, humble to a sinner's cross. You broke my shame and sinfulness. You rose again, victorious. Faithfulness none can deny. Through the storm and through the fire, there is truth that sets me free. Jesus Christ, who lives in me. You are stronger, sin is broken, you have saved me, it is written, Christ is risen, Jesus, you are Lord of all. Jesus, you are Lord of all. Amen. Excuse me. Pastor, would you go ahead and bring us this morning's sermon?
As David mentioned, this is sort of a new frontier for all of us here, figuring out how to do this well. And so, as you're being quarantined, or we're trying to adhere to the guidelines that we've been given, not only will we have this morning service, but I'm planning on doing a Bible study, which when we can do that, I will be live streaming. And then I'm hoping to also do another Bible study on a different format, where we'll be able to talk to one another, and I will be giving out the details on that pretty soon, when I figure out when we're going to do it exactly. So, yeah, glad that you're watching this, and let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father God, thank you for blessing us. Lord, thank you that you're with us through everything. And I just thank you that you're in control of everything. And Lord, I pray that as we walk through these days, that we would trust in you and place our hope only in you. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So, it's pretty obvious by now. I was going to say, if you've been following the news, but that would be an understatement. The fact is that we are facing a time of crisis. And besides the virus, which seems may seem to be overwhelming, maybe even unstoppable. It may seem that way. There's the added hardship of shortages of things. Of course, they aren't real shortages. They're temporary. They're created by people in panic and by those who think a crisis is an opportunity for profit. But the reality is that all the usual stuff is still being produced. In fact, there's probably more toilet paper being produced right now than at any time in history, as they ramp up their production to meet demand. And I'm sure that soon production of all these things, demand and production will balance out. And because of all this, I suspect that those who purchase huge quantities of stuff with a plan to profit from a crisis will be stuck with their stockpiles. Because in a capitalistic society like our economy, as I said, production will meet demand even if it's lagging for now. Despite this fact, there is an appearance of a shortage. And it does remind me of when I was a boy. Of course, something reminds me when I was a boy. growing up in Tanzania, there were real shortages. I mean, these stores were bare not because of panic or greed or anything else, but because there actually wasn't anything. In Tanzania, the crisis was caused mostly by poor leadership, poor decision-making on their part. When Tanzania gained its independence as a nation from Great Britain, they decided that socialism was the way to go. I mean, socialism always sounds great. Share and share alike. Take from the rich, give to the poor. The government confiscated farms, businesses, factories. They were now the people's farms, the people's businesses, the people's factories to be used for the benefit of everyone. Sounds wonderful. And they handed all these things over to government officials to be run by the government. And of course, these people didn't have the knowledge or the incentive to run them. So pretty soon, almost nothing was being produced in the country anymore. So people began to import what they used to buy locally. The government noticed that, and they passed laws banning the import of whatever they were supposed to be producing. And very soon there was little or nothing. I can remember one year at the annual meeting for the Baptist Mission of Tanzania. It was being held in the town of Iringa. The entire meeting came to a complete stop one day. Someone returned from town and said, "There's toilet paper at the market." And missionaries abandoned their meetings and scrambled for their cars. The lucky ones returned triumphantly with toilet paper. It wasn't in rolls anymore. The rolls had been cut lengthwise so that the merchant could double his profit on his precious merchandise there. It would take a long time to describe all the social upheaval that the government of Tanzania was causing, or the further hardship that a war with Uganda caused. But God had a purpose in all of it. For one thing, it broke generations of bondage to ancestral worship and to spirit worship. And it caused thousands of Tanzanians to look for answers elsewhere. And many of them found their answer in Jesus. Thousands of people came to faith during that time. That certainly was not the intention of the socialist government of Tanzania, but that was the result. Thousands of people were saved. And that's salvation not for a day or even for a year, but that is salvation for all of eternity. And as I said before, it stands to reason that because of our capitalist economy, it's only a matter of time before supply will outpace demand. Regardless of who you voted for, it's good to know that there are people in charge, people who are trying to solve the problems. Of course, your perception on how well they're doing depends on which news source you choose to listen to. Personally, I think our president and our vice president and all the other leadership are doing a great job, but they're just men. They can't see into the future. They can only react to things as they happen. They They're trying to find answers. But they won't be perfect answers. They will make missteps along the way. And as much as authority as they have, there are many things which are just beyond their ability to control. As much faith as I have in our elected leadership, as much comfort as I can take from knowing that the crisis is being addressed by them, I do not ultimately place my hope in them. I know that they are not the ones who are really in control. I know that hope placed in human leadership is misplaced. There's someone else that we should all place our hope in every hour of every day, crisis or no crisis. And with that, would you please turn with me to Psalm 24. And I am reading from the Holman's Christian Standard Bible, but I'm sure it's pretty close in whatever translation you're using. It says a Davidic Psalm. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord. For he laid his foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. Who may ascend to the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not set his mind on what is false, and who has not sworn deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from the Lord from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of God, the God of Jacob. Selah. I lift up your heads, you gates. Rise up, ancient doors. Then the King of glory will come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, you gates. Rise up, ancient doors. Then the Lord of glory will come in. Who is he, this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Selah. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants, belong to the Lord, for he laid his foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. King of glory is how the Holman's titles this psalm. The King James Version titles it God's Lordship in the World. Of course, but both titles tell us what this psalm is about. It's about the fact that God is in control. He is the creator of everything, and he didn't lose control of his creation somewhere along the way. He is guiding it. Its destiny is set. It is, he will guide it according to his will. And that is comforting to know, especially in times of crisis. It's comforting to know that God is really the one who is in control. The earth and everything in it, including ourselves, belong to God. He made it all. And God was not surprised by the Wuhan virus. In fact, he was very unsurprised. And that's the great thing about God being in control. He's never surprised by anything. And he has all the answers. God sees things long before they happen. He places people where they need to be so that His will is accomplished. Because God is good and God is all-powerful, some people question as to why a good and all-powerful God would allow bad things to happen. And of course, that's a legitimate question. And I think we can find some answers to that sort of question in the story of Joseph. Most of us know the story of Joseph from beginning to end. And I'm not going to really read from it. I'm going to tell you about this story. So as I'm telling you about it, try to forget that you know the end. Okay, try to experience the story as it unfolds. If you want to check on me, see that I'm doing it right, the chapter that it starts at in Genesis is chapter 37. It takes a break in chapter 38 and then picks back up again in chapter 39. But Joseph started out his life pretty good. He was his dad's favorite, the firstborn of his dad's favorite wife. Of course, everything couldn't have been wonderful for Joseph. After all, his mother had died in childbirth, giving birth to him. But he was Dad's favorite. And as he grew, he had some pretty cool dreams. They were dreams about one day ruling over his brothers. That's a pretty cool dream. Then one day, his dad sent him to check on his brothers. Now his brothers were looking after the sheep. They were out in the fields with the sheep. When they saw Joseph coming from a long ways away, long before he got there. And as he came, they began to talk about him, and they were jealous of him. And so they decided that what they wanted to do with Joseph when he got there was to kill him. I suspect the leaders of the brothers that wanted to kill Joseph were Levi and Simeon. If we read the story of that family, we find that Levi and Simeon were always taking the lead in violence. But Reuben spoke up to spare Joseph's life. So instead of killing him, they threw him in a pit. Now Reuben was the oldest. And when you think about the fact that he was the oldest, he had the responsibility for his younger brother. He should have taken a stronger stand against his brothers. But he was, as his father said about him, he was unstable as water. Now Judah was the real leader in the group. And he hatched a plan to sell Joseph as a slave. And as usual, Judah's plan won out. As bad as Judah's plan was, it was better than his brother's. Okay? Judah's plan to sell his brother was better than killing him, I suppose. It did spare Joseph's life. He was sold as a slave to some traders that were coming by, and they took him to Egypt. And they sold him there to a man named Potiphar. And Joseph served in Potiphar's household. But then Joseph was falsely accused of attempted rape and thrown into prison. Now, imagine Joseph through all of this? You think that Joseph ever doubted that it was God who was guiding all these events? You think that Joseph ever doubted that God cared about him? And if God really cared, wouldn't he have freed him from prison? If God was really powerful, wouldn't he have stopped all these bad things from happening to Joseph? I mean, one side of all this is the physical suffering. He was forced to walk for miles through the desert heat, probably with his hands tied, being dragged behind a smelly camel. In jail, he suffered pain. Psalm 105 tells us that they hurt his feet with shackles and put an iron collar around his neck, so that his discomfort was constant for what must have been weeks, if not months. On top of the physical discomfort, there must have been a great deal of mental and emotional suffering as well. The pain of betrayal by his brothers, his longing to be with his father, all these things must have been constant companions. Imagine the uncertainty and the helplessness he felt on the long journey to Egypt as he walked behind a camel, wondering who he would be sold to, what type of labor he'd be forced to do. Imagine the humiliation of being auctioned off to the highest bidder. It doesn't seem, if you look at all those things, the circumstances that Joseph found himself in, that God really cared about Joseph. But in Genesis chapter 39, verse 21, it says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and extended his loving kindness to him." That was while he was in the prison. He granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So God had a purpose in everything that happened to Joseph. Joseph was not suffering needlessly, pointlessly. God was with Joseph, even in the midst of his hardships. It says that the Lord is with Joseph and extended kindness to him. The King James Version uses the word mercy. The word in Hebrew is hesed. The term loving kindness is probably the closest to a literal translation. God is with Joseph in his suffering, and his loving kindness never left Joseph. The psalm I referred to earlier, Psalm 105, verse 16, says, "He called down famine against the land and destroyed the entire food supply. He had sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. They hurt his feet with shackles. His neck was put in an iron collar. Until the time his prediction came true, the word of the Lord tested him. The king sent for him and released him. The ruler of peoples set him free. He made him master of his household, ruler over all his possessions, binding his officials at will, and instructing his elders." Truth is that God was working out his will through the good and maybe especially the bad things that happened to Joseph. God was in charge the whole time, because God wanted Joseph in charge of Egypt at just the right time. Now, as I said, we're familiar with the story. We know that 7 years of famine were about to come on Egypt. And God was going to use Joseph for, amongst other things, to save millions of lives. And Joseph, after all the things that had happened to him, was able to recognize God's control, even in the hardships. Genesis chapter 45, verse 7, Joseph had these words to say to his brothers. He said, God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of his entire household, and ruler over all of Egypt. See, his brothers thought that they had done it, that they had plotted, that they had sold him into slavery. But Joseph saw the hand of God, that God had sent him there. He also said to his brothers later on, again, the same thing in chapter 50, verse 20 of Genesis. You planned evil against me. God planned it for good, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. So the question for us is, do we think that God is in control of everything that's going on? Is he in control of the Wuhan virus? We know people definitely aren't in control of it. Seems to be pretty much out of control. But God is controlling everything. If we suffer a little, or even a lot, does that mean that God has abandoned us? God created the world and everything in it. He is in complete control. God has a purpose in everything that happens, even difficulties. He has a purpose even in the Wuhan virus. Now, do I know what that purpose is? Not a clue. But I know that God is in control. And like Joseph, we trust in him. His loving kindness will never leave us. So why did God favor Joseph? Why did God's loving kindness never abandon him? Continuing on in Psalm 24, so we're going back to Psalm 24, says, who may ascend to the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? David asked the question, who may ascend to the mountain of the Lord? And I think the question alludes to Mount Sinai. If you are familiar with that story, you'll remember that the mountain was blocked off. A barrier was built around it. Moses warned the people not to cross the barrier. If anyone or even an animal crossed the barrier, they were to be stoned. The whole thing was terrifying. And only those who said could come across the barrier could cross it. Only a very few were permitted on the mountain. And of those, only Moses truly ascended the mountain into God's presence. So we might ask, who's like Moses? Who's like Joseph? Do you want to ascend the mountain of the Lord? Psalm 24, verse 4. The answer that David has is the one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not set his mind on what is false, and who has not sworn deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of God, of Jacob. Selah. So I know many of you have been trying to keep your hands clean. But what about your heart? What about your mind? What about your tongue? We know and understand that we can never enter into God's presence by our own holiness. We know that our best efforts are, as Isaiah 64 says, as filthy rags. But what David says here is that if you trust in God, you'll receive a blessing from the Lord. You see that? Righteousness from the God of your salvation. It's only by faith in Jesus that we are able to enter into God's presence. It's only through faith in Jesus that God's righteousness is given to us in exchange for faith. But that doesn't mean that if we have that, if we've trusted in Jesus, that doesn't mean that we should coast into heaven. Our obedience and our integrity matters. It gives evidence to what Jesus has done in our lives. It says, David says, such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of God, of the God of Jacob. And we are facing difficulty, but wouldn't it be better to be known as the generation that sought God rather than the generation that dealt with a Wuhan virus epidemic? Such is the generation of those who seek him. Verse 7, Psalm 24. Lift up your heads, you gates. Rise up, ancient doors, then the Lord, the King of glory, will come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, you gates. Rise up, ancient doors, and the King of glory will come in. Who is he? This King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Selah. So you have trusted in Jesus. You live in this world, but you're not of this world. Your hope is not in men. Your hope is in the King of glory. He is strong and mighty. And as the psalm says, he's coming back. And there's nothing that can stop him. This says the ancient doors will rise up and let him in when he returns. The question for us today is, have we let him into our hearts? Have the doors of your heart opened up to receive him? He is the King of glory, but is he King in your life? Let's go into prayer. Father, we thank you that in times of difficulty, in times of goodness and abundance, and every time you are in control of it all. Lord, I pray for our faith that we would trust your hand. Trust that your will is being accomplished. Trust that your loving kindness will never leave us. Trust that when this brief life is through, we may ascend to your holy mountain, to your presence. We ask for your guidance in these times. We thank you for what you're doing. Pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So, as we close, can't give an invitation, but if you're watching this on Facebook and you have questions, you can always private message the North Cheyenne Baptist Church Facebook page, or if you want to email me, my email is Daniel, NCBC, as in North Cheyenne Baptist Church, @gmail.com. Thank you.